Sneaking into the crime scene. They didn't go far from Malik's manor. They walked to the nearest central intersection where a great stone balcony protected pedestrians from an impressive drop down into the city's lower tiers and towards the ocean. Nightingale found it hard to appreciate the view just now. Malik's informant had been murdered, and with him, her own future might be dead too. She turned her back on the ocean, facing her concerned friends. "Well, we obviously can't wait." She tried to keep the desperation and fear out of her voice, though she wasn't sure she'd done a convincing job. "You're right," Rook said. "So what should we do? Find another informant somewhere else?" "No," Nightingale replied. "This one apparently already had what we needed. There might not be anybody else in the whole damn kingdom who knows about Theodosian magic." Zeke looked out of the ocean. "Maybe not. But how can we find a killer the authorities can't?" "I can take you there." A horrible voice inside of Nightingale's head resonated. It sounded like a thought, except that it wasn't her own. There was a distinctly alien quality about it, one that produced an involuntary wave of nausea along with it. Startled by the voice, Nightingale jumped back, striking the stone railing with her tail. She didn't fall, though it did sting painfully where she'd hit her tail. She looked around, but found only her friend staring at her.
"Theodosian leaves a stain on your world wherever it goes, much like humans do."
With each new word, a wave of nausea hit Nightingale, making her feel unsteady. How could a thought sound so smug, so full of itself? She wanted to hit something, but the only thing in front of her was Zeke looking dumbly at her behind a cigarette. "Why don't you come out so I can kick your ass?" Nightingale said with a panicked voice. Zeke looked around and then back to the princess. Night, are you okay?" She stumbled and clung to Zeke's arm so that she wouldn't fall. "It's talking to me," Nightingale said, feeling sick. Her friends all glanced at each other, their eyes full of worry. "Night?" Zeke mumbled, putting an arm around her. "Are you okay?" Nightingale didn't say anything. After a few moments of silence from the Malama, Nightingale regained her composure and stood without Zeke's help.
"It's talking to you? The Malama?"
Rook asked, glancing around them nervously as if the creature would appear at any moment. Nightingale nodded, her eyes wide. "I heard it back in Balthazar's study. I was hoping that it was just—" She shook her head and trailed off.
"What did it say?"
Rook was curious, though he felt a little bad about it. "It doesn't matter. It's gone now. I'm okay." Nightingale's color slowly started to return to her face. Zeke looked concerned, but he didn't ask about the voice in her head. Instead, he proposed a plan.
"I suggest we just find out where the murder happened."
Zeke wearily watched Nightingale, his cigarette drooping to one side of his mouth.
"My cousin rules this city, right? And if the murder is such a big deal, I bet everybody is talking about it. We could just ask around and see where it happened. The crime scene should be a good place to start."
Nightingale nodded. "Maybe we'll get lucky and the murderer left behind the info we need." It seemed like wishful thinking, but Nightingale didn't much mind. They found the informant's house after less than an hour of searching. Zeke had been right. All he had to do was ask, and anyone who knew his family was happy to point them in the right direction. They found the house on one of the lowest levels of the city, only just above the ocean itself. Unfortunately, when they arrived, the house was guarded. Outside, its doors were flanked by 2 men. Though they were clearly not with the city watch, they wore the same black as Malik's house guards and lurked near the house instead of standing out in the open. "You guys wait here." Remy slid her tools away, straightening herself. "I'll talk to the guards, then let you in from the inside."
Rook frowned. "Are you sure, Remy? Those aren't city guards and it's already dark. You sure they won't try something?"
She nodded. "They're Black Hand. They'll know Malik's daughter even if they never met me. They'll listen."
"What's the Black Hand?" Zeke asked, glancing once around the corner at the guards. "Sounds like a shady group."
"It's my dad's organization." Remy's confidence faltered at Zeke's mention of them being shady. "I know my dad's in charge of the group. I think they must be spies or private contractors for the aristocracies." She shook her head vigorously. "We have bigger problems right now. You guys hold on." Remy left them.
"Yeah, that's not a super shady response,"
Zeke scratched at the back of his head, watching Remy approach the black handguards from afar.
Her dad looks like a supervillain, and he has henchmen? That's strike 2, I think.
Rook held up a hand with an angry shushing noise, and Zeke went silent. They watched as Remy strode out onto the street, walking straight for the door.
"Excuse me, you two," she called. "I have a message from my father, Malik."
Nightingale watched a few minutes of tense conversation from behind a stunted shrub, not moving so as to blend into the shadows. Zeke and Rook waited beside her, all three of them ready to spring to Remy's aid if she needed it. She didn't, and soon enough the guards left in a hurry. After they'd left, Remy entered the house, and a long minute passed before her face appeared from the now open front door. She waved at them urgently to come towards her.
"No way! Good job!"
Nightingale said as she moved towards Remy.
"What did you tell those guards to get them to leave?"
Nightingale stopped talking as she neared Remy and saw her face. It was pale, and Remy's eyes were wide, irises lost in her round pupils. Nightingale was about to ask what was wrong when the stench hit her, and she nearly doubled over to retch. The odor was heady, and so thick she could practically see the haze floating through the house, like rotting, half-cooked meat left out long enough to get maggoty.
"Sweet Jesus, what is that?"
Zeke sounded just as queasy as Nightingale felt.
"It looks worse than it smells,"
Remy answered, her voice barely a squeak. She wasn't lying. As the group shut the door behind them, Nightingale had to pause to take in the gruesome sight. If Nightingale imagined what it might be like for someone to explode from the inside, she wouldn't have been far off. Blood and bits of flesh coated every surface of the small front room. It was concentrated around a desk and chair in a series of gruesome splatters. Where much of the wreckage was mercifully blended gore, there were frighteningly human pieces scattered about too. Some bits looked like they'd almost been cooked, while others were raw and had flies buzzing around them in low circles. Nightingale found a clean corner of the house to vomit. She spent several minutes hyperventilating, trying and failing to ignore the smell. When she finally returned to where her friends were, she found them investigating. They were huddled around a black ledger. Behind them, Surrey was floating and reading the ledger over Rook's shoulder. Surrey was still formed of light, and the violet glow she brought made the room even more ghastly. Nightingale swayed a bit as she listened to Rook read. Anzu of the pure waters recovered 19 talents of gold, Pascal's scepter of rubies, Lord Beer, 1 carved puzzle. Surrey cut him off.
"Those names should not be here,"
she flowed across the room, glancing about.
"Rook, these names came from my realm. Every one of them has been killed."
"On Midara?" Zeke frowned down at the list. "There are that many of you here?" She nodded.
"We are all subject to the rules of this world in different ways. Those are all dark names, but that does not justify the way they died."
Blue storm clouds seemed to roll about Surrey's feet, cracking with thunder that didn't produce sound.
"That might be property stolen from the dead. Dangerous spoils, Rook. Your kind should not tamper with the possessions of creatures like these."
Rook shut the book, tucking it away into a massive pocket. "So what? This guy was peddling rare and dangerous artifacts? Maybe someone or something killed him for the artifacts." Rook glanced around the room. "I mean, I don't see any of them here." Zeke shrugged. "I'd rather think about this outside."
"Good idea."
Remy still looked pale as she led the way towards the door.
"I could use some fresh air."
They were almost to the back door when something crashed from below the house. A faint female voice sounded from somewhere just below the floorboards, though Nightingale couldn't make out the words. Rook pointed silently to a scuffed patch of the floor just in front of them. He reached down and pulled sharply on an uneven junction between 2 floorboards. A hatch swung open, revealing a ladder down into the gloom. The interior might be dark, but it was thankfully devoid of blood. There was no need for deliberation. Nightingale followed Rook down the ladder, Remy and Zeke just behind her. It led to a cellar bigger than the whole house above it. Shelves had been carved into the walls, and all were full.
"Hello?"
Nightingale called into the dark, stepping forward a little.
"Is someone there?"
She already had her weapon drawn. After all, this might very well be the killer.
"Hello?"
Someone replied from the darkness, imitating Nightingale's fearful tone perfectly.
"Is someone there?"
They froze, and then a female form contorted within the darkness. It walked strangely, jerking and stumbling along. With a snap of her fingers, the cellar lit in a purple glow as huge eyes opened seemingly from nowhere.